A trade shock is reverberating through one of the world's fastest growing economies. Washington's sudden decision to double tariffs on Indian exports has not only rattled manufacturers and exporters, but has also stirred doubts about the reliability of the United States as a long-term partner. Analysts warn the move could push New Delhi closer to powers that Washington itself sees as rivals, Russia and China. Among the sharpest critics is former Indian diplomat Navdeep Suri, who warns that while India has always managed to survive past storms, the damage this time may cut deeper. In his words, each time, while the Indian economy was impacted, we managed to weather the storm and come out stronger. So I see that India, as a country which has a degree of self-esteem, if nothing else, I don't see India lining up with the ranks of those, as President Trump sort of very vulgarly announced, as countries lining up to kiss his arse. That remark captures both India's sense of resilience and its growing unease. This is not the first time the country has faced trade barriers from Washington, but rarely has the rhetoric been so volatile, the tone so mercurial, and the trust so visibly shaken. At the heart of the dispute are steep tariffs on Indian garments and textiles, industries that rely on razor-thin margins and employ millions of workers. Suri explains, certainly a 50% tariff puts Indian exporters and Indian garment manufacturers at a clear disadvantage vis-à-vis countries like Vietnam or Bangladesh, on which their tariff level is much lower. And these are very low-margin businesses. So when you have a 30% difference between the tariffs on one country and another, you will quickly see the importers drifting to other sources. The numbers are sobering. A 50% tariff means Indian products suddenly cost dramatically more in US markets compared with competitors. Importers chasing cheaper deals will turn to Bangladesh, to Vietnam, even to China. The result could be shuttered factories in Punjab, lost jobs across industrial hubs, and yet another blow to India's fragile employment base. But what troubles observers most is not the economic hit alone. It is the erosion of trust. Suri notes, I think what has been damaged is trust, and that trust will certainly take longer to repair and restore than other aspects of the bilateral relationship. Some of the statements we've witnessed coming out of Washington over the last few weeks have again given rise to the sentiment that the United States is an unreliable partner. And that sentiment, I think, is very pervasive at this point of time in India. In diplomatic circles, trust is currency. Once spent, it cannot be easily replenished. While tariffs may one day be rolled back, the perception of unreliability may linger far longer. This is precisely why India, in the face of American unpredictability, is exploring steadier ground with others. Suri draws the contrast sharply. With Russia, which in India is once again being seen as the steady and reliable partner, as opposed to the volatile and mercurial one that we have in Washington. With China, as you know, things had gone downhill following the Chinese aggression in Galwan. But over the last 6 months, we've seen steady efforts by both sides to restore that relationship, to bring it back to the pre-Galwan level. The statement is telling. Russia, despite its own economic and geopolitical turmoil, still occupies a place of trust in Indian eyes. Moscow continues to supply arms, oil and diplomatic support without the erratic swings often seen in US policy. China, though a more complicated case, is also slowly resetting ties with New Delhi after the bloody Galwan Valley clashes in 2020. The fact that Beijing and New Delhi are even attempting to restore their pre-Galwan relationship underscores the lengths India is willing to go to diversify its partnerships. Suri points to a crucial moment ahead. You can see that that's work in progress. And I think that the Prime Minister's visit to China in a couple of days' time for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and his bilateral with President Xi Jinping will be something that many of us will be watching with a lot of interest. The optics of India's Prime Minister sitting down with Xi Jinping will be watched not just in Beijing and Delhi, but also in Washington. The US has long positioned India as a counterbalance to Chinese power in Asia. But if Washington's own actions drive India closer to Beijing, America risks undermining its own Indo-Pacific strategy. Equally important is the Quad, the grouping of India, the US, Japan and Australia, seen as a bulwark against Chinese influence. Suri stresses the significance. There's also the Quad meeting that India is supposed to host at the end of the year, And again, I think it's going to be important to see whether President Trump comes for that Quad summit, whether the US commitment to Quad, which has been a bipartisan commitment, still stands. So I guess we have several windows of opportunity in the coming weeks for a high-level dialogue to see if the whole discussions on the trade deal can be reset. The stakes are high. If President Trump attends the Quad summit, it could reassure skeptics of US consistency. If he does not, it may further feed the perception that Washington's commitments are fleeting, its policies transactional. Beyond geopolitics, the fallout at home could be severe. Millions of Indian workers depend on exports to the US for their livelihoods. The garment sector, the leather industry, pharmaceuticals and IT services all could suffer if trade ties are weakened. And while India has always managed to adapt, the pain of adjustment may fall hardest on small businesses and low-income workers. History offers some perspective. In the late 1990s, when India tested nuclear weapons and faced sanctions, the country dug in, diversified, and emerged stronger. Today, many argue that the tariff crisis could have a similar effect, pushing India to expand ties with Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Already, Indian exporters are eyeing alternative markets to compensate for US losses. Yet none of this erases the central irony. Washington has for years championed India as a strategic partner, a democratic ally, and a counterweight to China. Now, by imposing punitive tariffs, it risks alienating the very partner it seeks to strengthen. In doing so, it opens the door for Russia and China to present themselves as more reliable alternatives. As Suri repeatedly emphasized, the real casualty is not tariffs alone, it is trust. And once broken, trust is not easily repaired. It takes years of steady engagement, consistent policy, and reliable partnership to rebuild. Whether the US is willing to make that effort remains to be seen. In the weeks ahead, 2 meetings could prove decisive. The Prime Minister's visit to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and the Quad Summit in New Delhi at year's end. How Washington chooses to act in these moments will send a clear message, either that it remains a dependable partner or that India must look elsewhere for stability. For India, the message is clear. It will not be bullied into submission, nor will it join the ranks of nations that accept Washington's dictates unquestioningly. It will weather the storm, but it will also recalibrate, strengthen ties with others, and assert its independence on the global stage. From Amritsar, this is not just a story about tariffs and textiles. It is a story about shifting alliances, about the fragility of trust, and about a world in which India's choices could reshape the balance of power.
Each time, while the Indian economy was impacted, we managed to weather the storm and come out stronger out of that storm. So I see that India as a country which has a degree of self-esteem, if nothing else. I don't see India lining up with the ranks of those, as President Trump sort of very vulgarly announced, as countries lining up to kiss his ass. Certainly a 50% tariff puts Indian exporters and Indian garment manufacturers at a clear disadvantage vis-a-vis countries like Vietnam or Bangladesh, on which their tariff level is much lower. And these are very low margin businesses. So when you have a 30% difference between the tariffs on one country and another, you will quickly see the importers drifting to other sources. I think what has been damaged is trust. And that trust will certainly take longer to repair and restore than other aspects of the bilateral relationship. I think some of the statements that we've witnessed coming out of Washington over the last few weeks have again given rise to that sentiment that the United States is an unreliable partner. And that sentiment, I think, is very pervasive at this point of time in India. With Russia, which in India, I think somewhat in contrast to the United States today, is once again being seen as the steady and reliable partner, as opposed to the volatile and mercurial one that we have in Washington. With China, as you know, things had gone downhill following the Chinese aggression in Galwan. But over the last 6 months, we've seen steady efforts by both sides to restore that relationship, to bring it back to the pre-Galwan level. You can see that that's work in progress. And I think that the Prime Minister's visit to uh, to China in a couple of days' time for the SCO summit and his bilaterals with President Xi Jinping will be something that many of us will be watching with a lot of interest. There's also the Quad meeting that India is supposed to host at the end of the year. And again, I think it's going to be important to see whether President Trump comes for that Quad summit, whether the US commitment to Quad, which has been a bipartisan commitment, still stands. So I guess we have several windows of opportunity in the coming weeks for a high-level dialogue to see if the whole discussions on the trade deal can be reset